it's a well-touted figure, but the digital technologies industry accounts for 4% of global carbon emissions, which is actually double the airline industry. So the digital industry as a whole has quite a significant footprint and a key role to play. And importantly, it's also increasing. If you think about connected devices and just actually how the internet and our consumption of it has been designed, it is full of waste and excess. So even though it's seen as the most efficient way to advertise, it's actually, from a sustainability point, a real carbon hotspot for us.
The internet is kind of an intangible thing. It's in our pockets. We go about our day-to-day lives just on a phone, unlike flying, where people know that flying has a carbon emission. But the environmental impact, and if we focus in on carbon emissions specifically, there's lots of different calculations where internet can range from 2% to 4% of global emissions, which, if we put that in tonnage, can be around 1.1 gigatons of CO2. So it's massive.
To date, it's been very inconsistent, and how people have responded has been as individual companies and been led by a few, but large majority are sort of what we would call laggards. However, it's taken sort of a disruptive, innovative company coming into the market with a measurement tool to really accelerate that pace of change and, more importantly, galvanise the industry around what is the role of digital advertising and how do we address our carbon impact.
There's definitely a lot of talk and there's a little bit of action on this as well. There's definitely some really good initiatives going on, things like AdNet Zero. I think Group M's decarbonisation framework we think is pretty robust and transparent, which is really, really important. But I think we do need more transparency and we need some standard as well. The Guardian released a documentary last week to coincide with COP. Our award-winning environmental journalist Fiona Harvey interviewed politicians, activists, scientists to talk about whose responsibility it is to save the planet. And she closed out sort of commenting on the fact that it can feel a bit of a burden, and actually sort of reframed that and said that it should be something where saving the planet should not feel like a burden. It's a positive thing. It should be something that we're all excited to do.
Following COP26, it was positive to see conversations starting at not only a senior level, but also trickling down to kind of a planning and activation level. So we've seen the rise of AdNet Zero. At IAB Europe, we've also got a Sustainability Standards Committee in the effort to try and bring the industry together to have a collective view of the way in which we measure and calculate and then take action against carbon emissions. I think one really important thing is that's coming through now is a change in language and a realization that offsetting is not enough. So changing that narrative from offsetting to reduction is a really, really positive thing. And what are we doing? We're starting to see is we've got WPP taking an active stance as well in terms of their decarbonisation, Dentsu as well. So from the buy side through to the sell side, a realisation that we need to start reducing, not just offsetting as an industry to try and get the carbon emissions of physical ads. And I know there's conversations of the kind of onward impact of advertising, but what I'm talking about here is the actual delivery of those ads through the supply chain. With transparency comes a change in business models, right? So there's some business models that aren't transparent or are semi-transparent or are opaque by design, and we've known that as an industry. So there's a challenge of unpicking and unraveling that when it comes to the profitability, and like that's for a practice to be sustainable. It can't just be about the environment, unfortunately, as much as we'd like it to. Businesses exist to create profit. Sometimes our industry is focusing in on climate action only. And if we look at the United Nations, they've got the 17 Sustainability Development Goals, which range from removal of poverty through to climate action. Climate action is actually number 13. So I think we need to take a step back and educate people on what sustainability means for the digital advertising industry, so that we can come out as a kind of a united front. The last one I'd say as well is, I touched on it, one of the biggest blockers to actually, when it comes to the activation of digital advertising, is the KPIs that we're targeted on. The click-through, the cost per acquisition. We're starting to talk more about attention, which hopefully there's a narrative for attention and less but more impactful formats, therefore reducing the amount of ads that we put on a page can go hand in hand with sustainability. But until we have KPIs embedded in the success of a campaign that relate to either the reduction of energy consumption from a digital advertising campaign, which means lower carbon emissions, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to shift the dial.
So at The Guardian, we have a different ownership model. So we're owned by a trust, and the trust is there to deliver liberal journalism in perpetuity. Advertising makes up part of our financial model, but it's not even the main part of our financial model. It's a significant part, but it's not the main part. Not everybody has that same ownership model, and I think the ownership models are a problem where you're owned by a billionaire or multiple shareholders, where changing the system will cost you money. That becomes more complicated. There's an old advertising quote by Bill Bernbach that said, "It's not a principle until it costs you money." You can't go into this thinking about profit at all costs. The planet is too high of a price to pay. It's not the 80s anymore.
Short-termism versus looking at long-term prosperity. Change is hard. Change is also hard when you don't have the answers. And I think as an industry, we need to get comfortable with not having the answers.
We are auditing our own supply chain. So we're speaking to our digital partners to understand their emissions. I know we want to keep this positive, but the data we're getting back is mixed. But it's important we understand our own supply chain. We need to understand our own inventory as well. So we're looking at the weight in terms of carbon that all of our different advertising options account for. So we can be transparent with our advertising partners to sort of say, if you're looking at buying this format, it's heavy, this is medium, this is low. That's something that we're working on at the moment. The cookieless, lots of other things cross over into this. The cookieless future crosses over into this as well. So we know that that our cookieless solutions will be our least carbon intensive solutions as well. So that's a couple of ways we're thinking about our display advertising proposition.
We need everyone to commit to science-based targets and understand that. We need to collaborate. We need to see this as a pre-competitive phase, that we need to work together. Otherwise, we are not going to be welcomed in a net zero society. We need to prove the value of why digital advertising deserves the energy that it takes out of society.
The first part of that is that it's the right thing to do. Greenpeace protesting can only amplifies how important it is for all of us to come together.
Internally, there's two big levers. There is clients and agencies. As part of Group M and WPP, we've committed to net zero media plans by 2030. And our clients are now asking us about our science-based targets and our reduction strategy. So that cascades down onto our partners. And secondly, as an internal driver, our people care about our impact and the work that we're doing, and are becoming more carbon literate about the role of advertising.
Sustainability and the topic of it isn't a construct of our industry. But when it comes to sustainability and environmental impact, that's got eyes on it from every single general consumer. So there's that wider social awareness and almost now requirement of consumers that the brands that they engage with are socially responsible and responsible for the sustainability of their products and therefore the supply chain. So that downward pressure from the advertisers is reaching digital advertising now, and it's causing that change and that need. And that's one of the big driving ones.
I think the second thing driving it is pressure, and that comes in a number of different ways. So I think there's definitely change in consumer attitudes. So consumers are putting brands under more pressure to provide better choices that align with their changing values. I think that comes through parents worrying about what sort of planet we're going to leave our children, or children worrying about what sort of planet they're going to be left at all. So there's definitely a drive for better choices. There's increasing pressure from shareholders to meet carbon targets as well.
Externally, we've got two big levers coming down the pipeline. We've got regulation. We're going to be asked to do a lot more disclosure around what is driving our carbon emissions. And I think outside of our industry, there's a lot of scrutiny of digital advertising and advertising as a whole. And secondly, in terms of external influence consumers, I think we're in a sort of a honeymoon period of about 12 to 18 months where consumers haven't linked carbon emissions to digital behaviours, but I think that is fast coming.
The other one is, and it's an interesting one when we dive into specifically digital advertising, there is a commercial advantage to having a sustainable business and sustainable business practices. And what we've seen in digital advertising over the last 10, 15 years is like almost a race to the bottom where programmatic came about and is serving very good purposes. But what we've also seen is elongating of the supply chain effectively, more partners within that supply chain, so more every single step of the chain adds carbon or adds energy consumption. And what people have started to realize, and this is it's a nice transition from the topic of transparency within digital advertising that has been around for the last 2 or 3 years, is actually transparency, better profit or better performance of digital advertising and sustainable practices should and can coexist. And if actually maybe it's the need for climate action and sustainable practices that finally drives the needle forward when it comes to transparency of digital advertising.
And I think the final part is money. So I think, the green rush can be lucrative, and we work in an industry, ad tech will capitalise on that. So it's important that the right people are rewarded. There is money in this space, and it's important that money goes to the right places. We need standards, because otherwise everybody's going to go off and do their own thing. And there's lots of good people out there trying to do the right thing, but it's hard to do the right. You need some standards for guidance. And also, if you don't have those standards, there are some not so good people who are going to do some not so good things. So it's why standards are really important, and it's why the IAB Standards Committee is really, really important part of this. So I think that will help all of us get to a better place. I think we all need to be much more transparent and put pressure on all of our advertising partners, the advertisers themselves, our agency partners, our ad tech suppliers, on being more transparent, because it's common sense that if you can't see it and you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to reduce or fix this.